This is a production of Cornell University.
Okay, hi, I'm Solveig Hanson. I'm excited to talk with you all today about participatory plant breeding and to get a chance to be a part of the Cornell plant science community. So today I'm going to talk to you about participatory plant breeding and variety trialing, which are themes that have connected my doctoral and postdoctoral work in vegetable breeding and that I now get to explore in my current role with the cover crop breeding network. So by way of introduction, my path to plant breeding started on the land. I grew up in Southwest Wisconsin, where my Norwegian and German ancestors settled in the mid to late 1800s on Ho-Chunk land. I was an outdoor kid. I still am. I went to college and caught the organic farming bug. And then I spent 8 seasons as co-owner of a direct market vegetable farm in Northeast Iowa. For me, farming tied together environmental care, working outside, business and marketing, and caring for my community. I saw it as a way to put ethics into action and ethics into tangible, even edible form. But after selling that farm, after about 8 years, I moved to Western New York. I got a job at Harris Seeds up in Rochester, New York as organic product manager. As a farmer, I had known, I'd observed the difference between varieties and knew that the choice of variety made a lot of difference in how well my farm was going to do that year. But as a product manager, I got to observe these differences systematically. I didn't, however, know how these differences came about. But then came an organic plant breeding workshop in 2012, where I heard folks, including professors here at Cornell, describe population creation, selection, reproductive biology. And I started to think maybe this is something I could learn also. So I made some contacts at University of Wisconsin, and long story short, ended up earning a doctorate in beet breeding with Dr. Erwin Goldman at University of Wisconsin. And then I went on to do a postdoc in participatory vegetable breeding at UBC. Before starting my plant breeding stories, I'm just going to take a beat to recognize that I've farmed and done research on the ancestral traditional lands and coercively acquired lands of many different indigenous groups. Land acknowledgements have been aptly critiqued for being perfunctory or performative. But I do think it's appropriate just to hold a space to acknowledge that seed as a way of literally making space on the land for the people who eat those crops and the farming systems that grow those crops to sustain themselves. And that seed is used as a tool of control and colonization, even as it's also used as a tool of sustenance. So I'm just going to invite us to hold that in awareness and to hold in awareness who and what we're making room for on the land when we do our work. Early in my plant breeding journey, I heard Bill Tracy, who's a corn breeder at Wisconsin, talk about plant breeding as conversation, a multi-species conversation, most obviously between humans and crop plants, but with input from the many other species that compose an agroecosystem. So this conversational motif captured my imagination and reminded me of my experiences as a farmer, where I'm learning my land by trial and error, by my asking a question and getting an answer from my land about what it could do with what I was giving it. So when I learned that participatory plant breeding was not just a concept, but a field with a literature and researchers and practitioners, I knew that this was something I wanted to get involved in. So today I'm going to tell 2 stories. A participatory beet breeding story, a participatory variety trialing story, and then talk about possibilities for ways we can use these techniques to enhance cover crop networks' understanding of the crops we're working with and help advance varieties toward farmer adoption. So participatory plant breeding is a crop development strategy that facilitates farmer-involved selection in environments that diverge from conventional plant breeding environments. It was developed in the global south with farmers cultivating marginal land, but it's been adapted widely for use in the global north, specifically for farmers using organic and low input practices. So it facilitates direct selection in the target environment, which is often an organic or low input environment, instead of indirect selection in a conventional environment, which in certain cases and for certain traits can lead to better response to selection for complex traits like yield, climatic adaptation, and flavor. PPB allows for marketing to start while cultivars are being developed, and it also allows for creative space and relationships to build that can pay dividends both during and after the breeding process. Participatory breeding projects take a lot of different shapes. There's a new review of PPB in the global north by Michaela Colley, and she notes that agronomic crop improvement is only one reason that people use participatory techniques. Folks may want to preserve crop genetic diversity. They might want to pursue seed sovereignty or seed security goals, or they might want to more closely control the breeding techniques that are used. My first story is about beets, and it's going to require a little bit of background on beet flavor, which is coming now. Preference for table beet is very divergent. My favorite thing about working on table beet is that upon learning such, many people would tell me that they love beets or hated beets. There hasn't been a lot of systematic study of holistic beet flavor, but it's generally agreed that sweet, earthy, bitter, and harsh attributes are present in beet and each associated with one or several compounds. The earthy flavor is the one most associated with preference or non-preference for beets. So people think beets are dirt candy or that they just taste like dirt. Earthy flavor in beet is conferred by geosmin, this 12-carbon volatile molecule, which is synthesized by a wide variety of soil microbes. It is the scent of freshly turned earth, and it can be present in water and a variety of different foods, but it's usually recognized as a contaminant. Humans are very sensitive to this molecule, more so than many others. There we go. And a study that's almost as old as I am connected geosmin, earthy aroma, and the perception of, quote, signature beet flavor. And so based on these assumptions that geosmin is present, people think beets are earthy, and people either do or don't like that earthy flavor. My lab at the University of Wisconsin decided to investigate the origin and genetic control of geosmin in table beet. I could talk for a long time about that, but we are going to cut to the chase. Geosmin is heritable and endogenously produced by beet instead of being absorbed by beet from the soil environment. So despite the low resolution, this figure shows two QTL, two large effect QTL for associated with geosmin concentration in table beet. We've also shown geosmin heritability in both G/E studies and this recurrent selection experiment. But this recurrent selection experiment had a serendipitous dividend in that it produced these cool beet populations with both extreme geosmin concentration and segregating color. So I looked at these and thought, this is a cool population for participatory selection because it's got unique flavor and it's got unique color, and both of those things are engaging. So the Participatory Beet Breeding project sought to develop some specialty cultivars for particularly relevant in the organic and direct market farm sector, and to gauge geosmin preference in non-laboratory conditions. So I ran 2 models, and they each had 3 groups of selectors. So a farm group that would select for horticultural characteristics, and then 2 groups of hedonic selection participants, or people who told me how much they like to eat the beets. within the farm model, all these people were associated with a single farm south of Madison. And then in the outreach model, all of the group that I took a survey of farmers, about 24 farmers, and then both chefs and consumers convened by the Seed to Kitchen Collaborative helped with this hedonic selection. And that's a program of the UW Hort Department, specifically Julie Dawson's program. The first 2 cycles of participatory selection followed this model. You'll see that it started with 30 half-sieve families of either high or low geosmin character, and that families were eliminated at each step, leaving, which I'll say more about in a bit, leaving 5 families to intermate and create seed for the next generation. To guide horticultural selection, farmers rated the importance of various traits on a 1 through 5 scale on a survey or just in a conversation with Steve Pincus, the farmer in the photo. Farmers indicated, not unexpectedly, that high germination, ability to outcompete weeds, and disease resistance were top priorities for selection. So I made a selection index that weighted traits by farmer priority, and then also added qualitative comments. So using farmer priorities and my comments, 1/3 of the families were eliminated. The remaining families I sorted into groups based on their visual appearance. And then my hedonic selection participants went to work. I presented all 4 groups to the core group of selectors. So that was chefs in the outreach model and farm staff in the farm model. They narrowed it down to 2. Then I presented the last one to the consumer group, and they picked their favorite thing to be advanced to the next generation. We didn't find any differences between liking between high and low geosmin groups taken in aggregate, which is interesting given that geosmin and earthy flavor were assumed to play a role in preference or non-preference for beet. We did find 2 big disparities in liking, and that was around appearance. And those came when we compared a white beet group to a pigmented beet group. So on the order of 25% of people liking the white group and about 80% liking the pigmented group. But after trying them, those differences evened out. They were both equally liked, suggesting that a favorable flavor made up for this difference in appearance liking. So this is interesting. In studies of expectation, well, food with low color is often associated with an expectation of low flavor. And if that happened here, this would be a positive disconfirmation of expectations, or getting more than you thought you would, which people like. So that could explain some of this phenomenon we saw. Notably, both of these groups were selected by chefs. Both of the groups were selected by chefs whose job is to create both cuisine and expectations around cuisine. So this is one of those serendipitous benefits of having people involved who think differently than you do. I wouldn't have selected the white beet groups necessarily, but they did, and consumers really liked them. Yes. After 2 generations or two cycles of that selection process that I showed, the visual phenotypes were set. So we knew what we were heading for visually, so that same process didn't quite work because there weren't colors to sort by really. So we turned our participatory work toward flavor characterization, and ended up with some cultivars. So on the low geosmin side, we had Snow Globe and Evansville Ember. They're low geosmin, but it turns out that many commercial cultivars are low geosmin. That's just kind of what's out there. So they're not really unique in that aspect, but they're unique in the fact that they were the result of participatory selection, which is interesting. Some seed companies, especially those that focus on the story of plant breeding along with the products of it. One of those companies is Fruition Seeds up in Naples, really close to here. They serve gardeners and small scale farmers. And Evansville Ember, they took on as part of their offering, but in a different form. it really wanted to keep segregating, and the farm constituency kept saying we want a mild red beet. So we kept selecting out the other colors, but clearly there were recessive alleles at the two main color loci in beet, and then a third one that confers this blotchy or dappled or tie-dyed appearance. So it's a really unique population at this point, and they're letting it segregate because they think it's novel and it allows them to tell a story about plant breeding, how populations change from generation to generation, and they really want to embrace that. And I love that the cultivar is continuing to evolve after it left my hands. On the high geosmin side, we had 3 cultivars come out, 2 zone selections, one with a few more like coral and magenta tones, one selected to be a little bit lighter, and then this white beet with pink petioles. So these are unique in their flavor characteristics. So they are higher geosmin than basically every other beet out there. They're also unique in appearance. So the zone beets are different in both their vigor and their pigmentation than the Chioggia beet. And the Blushing Nut Bashful is the only pink petioled white beet that I know of. Blushing Nut Bashful is being offered by Fruition Seeds, and Evansville Orbit has been picked up by High Mulling Organic Seeds, and that is in seed production. So that's exciting to see them going somewhere. So a range of intellectual property agreements or arrangements can be made in participatory breeding programs. The best solutions for each situation are highly context dependent, but the general goal is to share with farmers both money, material benefits from the varieties, and also recognition for their work in co-selection. Our context was that this work was done at the University of Wisconsin under a federal Hatch grant using university resources. So the University Tech Transfer Office, WARF, had the first right to say what they wanted to do for an intellectual property arrangement. They declined to PVP or use a plant variety protection certificate on these beets, which is not uncommon in the vegetable world. But they did reserve the right to license them, which is a common method that they use. So in the case of the farm model, the farmers were easily identifiable as Steve Pincus and Beth Kasmar of PP Produce. But they decided they would love to be recognized for their work, but they don't care about any proceeds coming out of this. In the outreach model, the people involved were really too numerous to recognize this substantially, and certainly in terms of monetary payment. But the organization that convened them, the Seed to Kitchen Collaborative, does benefit from the royalties that come through WARF. So those royalties are divided basically 3 ways between UW Horticulture Department, the graduate school, and the inventors, which are myself, Erwin, and Lynn Mayer, who did the pre-breeding work. You know, if you do the math, like we don't get to know how much royalties are. That's between WARF and the seed company, but a fairly nominal percentage of an overall sale. 20% of that divided 3 ways is going to be enough to like get a coffee on, which is fine. I wasn't doing it to get rich, but yeah. My next participatory plant breeding story takes place north of the border in Canada, where I worked with the Canadian Organic Vegetable Improvement Project, or CANOVI. This is a farmer collaborative project launched in 2018 by the UBC Center for Sustainable Food Systems and the Bauta Family Initiative for Canadian Seed Security, which is a nationwide nonprofit that works with several regional nonprofits, including Farm Folk City, our BC organization. Quite a mouthful and quite a network. Well, the beet breeding project was driven by me, a researcher with some cool populations and some questions about beet flavor. CANOVI was driven by farmers and farmer advocates. So the Bauta Initiative had coalesced farmers who are interested in seed from both a biological and horticultural perspective, but also an economic, political, and ethical perspective. So they were very interested in seed security, even though there are a lot of good seed companies serving organic growers in North America, there is a border. And we've just been reminded recently that various types of disruptions can interrupt supply chains, right? And borders do matter for that reason. So these folks are interested in building both the knowledge and the community to either source or grow seed that they can use north of the border, where they have more control over it. They were particularly interested in sourcing open pollinated varieties, especially to compete with workhorse hybrids that they didn't want to rely on, since they can't count on them being on the market from year to year. They're very interested in adaptation regionally, which obviously varies widely across a place as big as Canada. So their goal was to identify and develop vegetable varieties for Canadian organic farms. So identify meaning trialing, and developing meaning breeding. The program did support a couple of participatory plant breeding programs, one in sweet pepper, one in carrots, but the biggest locus of grower engagement was in variety trialing. So, or PVT, for participatory variety trialing. It is valuable in its own right, in that it just allows people to see varieties on their farm. When we survey people, that was the #1 biggest benefit. Like, I get to see these things and also get some community to trade ideas with about what we're seeing in our different places. But getting to know more varieties than you might if you had to purchase all the seed yourself empowers people to shift varieties more easily when there is a seed shortage, or when they just want to diversify their crop offering. It helps them hone their observation skills. So we also heard on surveys that, I pay attention to what's happening on my farm, but I don't take notes, or like, I wouldn't discipline myself to go out every week or every couple weeks to see how these things were changing. And this got me to pay attention in a different way. So that's a value. Participatory variety trialing also serves as an entry point for participatory plant breeding, in that it can identify market niches where there isn't anything on the market that's really serving the purpose in a given region or for a given market. It can identify germplasm depending on what you're trialing, and it can build those critical farmer researcher relationships, which is where these good ideas for projects get started. So variety trial participants, so there were participants spread all the way across Canada. We had about 60 participants per year, some of whom perfect. Thank you so much. Some of whom trialed multiple crops in any given year. These were our 2022 trial crops. Oop. Oh, how do I get back on here? Here we go. Okay. So the structure of CANOVI variety trials were shaped by balancing the nationwide scale of the project with particular regional interests. So in the case of this rutabaga trial, we had a core set of 5 varieties that everyone was asked to trial, and then they could add on these other varieties that may be more relevant to one region or another. Especially Atlantic Canada has a strong attachment to rutabaga. For radicchio trials, we took a different strategy and grouped the varieties by days to maturity and market class, so that, say, growers in northern Canada could only trial the short day varieties, which are the only ones that have a chance of finishing during their season. We designated the plot size and the approximate in-row spacing and suggested planting dates for folks, but we asked them to use their normal maintenance techniques. So these are all organic farmers, but whatever they would normally do to maintain a crop, so we could get the most external validity, or the most real world validity. We use the seed-linked trialing platform for data collection and results visualization. This helped with consistency of data formatting and just ease of data collection compared to Google Sheet methods and taking a picture of the clipboard where I took the notes methods that had been used previously. For the years before I was there, participants used intuitive 1 through 5 ratings on various traits. When I got there and found myself equivocating over the course of a trial session, I thought, like, I would like a rubric to tell me what each level is supposed to mean. So we piloted that. We put out a rubric like this, specifying what levels of traits means and what we're actually trying to measure with each trait. And we got really good response. So on our season exit survey, about 80% of people said that the rubric was easy to use, that it helped them in understanding difference between trait levels, that it helped them rate more consistently among levels. And I think most importantly, that they would trust the data more this year, knowing that everyone had the same reference to use. Also, in response to a request for more in-season communication that wasn't an email, because emails are often overlooked during the busy season, I started making these trial videos from the field. When I would do ratings on my own plots, I would just give examples. This is one I'm giving a 2, and here's why. People really liked this. They were conversational. My face was dirty, but it was very real. So after collecting data from participants, we presented results in a few ways. One of the benefits to using SeedLinked is that immediately upon the trials being closed, interactive visualizations are available for people to play with. So there are bar charts for each trait. There are these pie charts that show the number of people who would or wouldn't grow a certain variety again. There are also photo galleries and comment galleries that are fun to look through and really kind of flesh out what might not be captured in numeric ratings. We also heard from people, though, that they wanted a printed report to be able to refer back to without having to wade into a website and play with variables. And as a researcher, I wanted to subject these things to some kind of statistical analysis. So we just did simple ANOVAs, bar charts, heat maps of means tables, and then a little simple explanation of what statistical significance means. My phrase was, the more bling, the more real the thing, like the more chance it is to be a result of real differences instead of variation. Okay, just a couple examples of results that we would offer. So this was from our Cara trial this past year, shows that all traits except appearance were more positive in, all traits except appearance showed some region effect, and all of the ratings were higher in Western Canada. You'll notice that my environmental variable is a very blunt instrument of west or east, because I tried that in hardiness zone, and hardiness zone or grouped hardiness zones didn't show much effect. But well, I guess we did see the same ranking of varieties in both west and east. We saw no cases of G by E, but that of course doesn't mean that it wasn't there. It means that we only had farm locations. We weren't integrating environmental variables, and that leaves a lot of questions unanswered and a lot of insights unseen, I think. So we'll say more about that later. I produced a variety summary for each variety. This is an example of the better of the two open-plated orange nonce carrot varieties that we trialed. So taken together, the numerical ratings, we did some quantitative yield data with a subset of growers. You can get an idea of what the variety is, of how much variation you might see. So a lot of variation in shape for this variety. Also quite a bit of variation in flavor, ranging from comments of water nothing flavor to is the best tasting carrot in the trial. So where it worked, it really worked, but it was not consistent. Some of the hybrids were very consistent, as you would expect. So we learned several things about increasing trial completion rates. It's essential for farmers to have input into and feel enthusiastic about the trial goals and the specific varieties that they're trialing. Contact throughout the season is really important because everybody's got a back burner something, and you need to stay in contact to make sure it's not the trial as often as possible. Data collection needs to be easy because people are balancing really busy lives. And if possible, a stipend or some kind of compensation really helps. These farmers were compensated $300 Canadian for a completed trial. And when I did interviews, everybody but one person mentioned unprompted that they really appreciated the payment. But that's an N of 9, so go figure. I know sometimes people participate in trials like this for free. It really just depends on what the context is. From those interviews, I also gleaned a couple important points. And one are that, I was asking all these questions about like, is this information useful to you? And one woman said, well, it's really whether it's usable rather than useful. Like just because I participated in a Radicchio trial this year, doesn't mean I'm really necessarily in the market for Radicchio seed next year. But if I need it, the information's there, I can interpret it easily, and that's the goal. I thought, okay, that makes sense. And also just over and over, it hit home that these trials are part of very busy lives in farm businesses. So we need to come humbly with easy instructions and just know that people are juggling a lot to be able to give us the feedback that we're looking for. And that in order to maintain the relationship, we need to reciprocate with useful or usable information in a timely manner. So I didn't cover the details of the CANOVI participatory breeding programs, but I just want to highlight a different option that they used for commercialization. They used the Open Source Seed Initiative Pledge, which is modeled after open source software. Is anyone familiar with OSSI? I imagine some folks are. So basically, it's that anyone is permitted to use the seed, to grow it, to sell the seed, to breed with it, but that any derivatives from that seed also need to be open source. So this is clear, well, it's clearly not appealing to larger commercial interests, so it's not legally binding. But the effect has been to create a pool of open source germplasm that is used by and curated by smaller scale breeders, on-farm breeders who value regional variety adaptation and preservation of culturally important cultivars. The OSSI pledge doesn't preclude charging royalties. They're not interested in that, but the Kitchen Table Seed House is offering the Renegade Red Pepper, and that they were one of the main farmer breeders involved. The carrots have yet to meet the market, but hopefully they will. And so now we're in the present. What am I doing on time? I'm okay. Yes. So as many of you know, the Cover Crop Breeding Network since 2015 has been breeding fall sown legume crops, legume cover crops for traits like fall emergence, winter survival, spring vigor, high biomass, hard seed, not shattering pods. And just last year, we began breeding cereal rye specifically for cover crop purposes. The network's first hairy vetch variety and the first few pea varieties, winter pea varieties, are moving toward release this year, which is exciting. This map shows sites of university and ARS breeding and trialing sites in purple and pink, and then a few orange dots with some on-farm breeding sites. So the growers at those orange pins worked with Lisa Kissing-Kusik, who is a Cornell grad, who's now at the ARS in Wisconsin, on a winter pea participatory breeding project from 2016 to 2018. Of the 6 pea varieties that are consistently beating checks in our advanced line trials, 4 were actually farmer selections. So the method, briefly, was that each farmer received 5 F4 pea crosses from the ARS breeder that we're collaborating with in Washington, according to their breeding priorities for peas on their farm. So the plan was to plant them out, care for them according to the farmer's normal practices, and then use a flagging system to select plants for various traits in each quadrant of the plot. And then select the best 10% of the plots for recombining and another selection the following year. The weather had different plans. A more parsimonious solution to just freeze everything except for about 10% of the plants. So that was a much simpler selection process, but really did produce some remarkably winter hardy lines. And the the plan was to bulk seed and replant the next year. For various reasons, that didn't work out, but we still got a really, we got an effective result. Yes, so 4 of them are on our list for release this year. Intellectual property arrangements for these peas will be guided by the ARS system, since the initial crosses for all but one of the varieties came from the ARS breeder, Rebecca McGee out in Washington. So we're hoping to make them public releases such that a deposit will be held in GRIN and will be available publicly, but that we can maintain stock seed and provide it to seed companies for trialing, etc. For the farmer selected lines, 2 of the farmers who participated one runs a seed company, Prairie Road Organic Seed in North Dakota, right? Yes. And then Doodle Farm sells various farm products off their farm in Wisconsin. So they have the first right of refusal for using those varieties on their farm, and then they can choose to also make them available to other seed companies. And then they also have a right to, we haven't been aiming to collect royalties on any of this, but if we did, they would receive a share of that. So while our trial network allows trialing, selection and trialing in many environments, there are only a few locations that are cold enough to really provide selection pressure or evaluation pressure for winter survival. So to more thoroughly test this and to introduce these winter peas, or winter peas as cover crops at all, to farmers, this fall we are planning small scale winter pea trials with we're hoping to roll out with 60 farmers, and we're hoping to get data back from 40 of them. We'll see how that ratio plays out. We're going to use the seedling platform that I described previously, but we're going to use a model where each farmer will receive a subset of 3 varieties from the total of 6, along with 1 consistent check. So this is a variation of the tricot design, which stands for triadic comparison of 3, which was proposed by Jacob Bannett and I see nodding heads a few years ago. And it basically conducts statistical analysis by comparing rank among cultivars, instead of by asking farmers to phenotype or things like that. Or I guess it creates ranks out of phenotype. But beyond those trials, this season, which will be on a relatively small scale, how could we use participatory methods or community science methods to inform our work and to expand the reach of these cultivars that we're producing? So we already have plans for the participatory work. So 3 of the most engaged, viable growers from the Participatory Pea Breeding project have re-engaged. They have peas in their fields this year, and we are excited to see what comes out of it. And in addition, some ideas are coalescing in the literature and in practice around a community science approach to participatory variety trialing. Some elements of which showed up in the CANOVI project and even the beet breeding project. So features of this approach are having multiple points of entry. So not everybody has to have a full-on selection experiment at their farm every year. Variety trials, especially smaller scale ones where you maybe only have 3 things to compare, are often easier for farmers to commit to. There are also even lower stakes ways to engage, like participatory field days, where farmers might flag or rate on a survey breeding lines or varieties that they find particularly appealing. Okay. These community science approaches make use of the ubiquitous digital technology that's around us. So data submission using various manners of smartphone apps, sometimes soil monitoring devices that are low cost and easy and small. Using modern data science to derive meaning from big, noisy, decentralized on-farm data. This method was introduced by Jacob Bennett's group at CIAT in 2019, or at least that's when it was published. And several recent studies have built on this design. One using bean in Central America, integrated weather data with farmer observations to discover drivers of environmental variation and then predict variety suitability for various regions in much more precise ways than could have been done before. A group including Jean-Luc recently published on the way data-driven decentralized breeding can improve genomic prediction. You folks worked on wheat. Because this decentralized model allows scaling of environmental and management data to meet the scale of genomic data, which is very interesting. And Halle Tufan was also part of the brand new PNAS paper describing how these data-driven approaches can incorporate social data, environmental data, even economic data. So like being able to reflect some of these values that surround breeding in addition to crop agronomic performance. So these are all very intriguing ideas and could have relevance to our work. I'm interested in the big data approaches potentially because we have a big network, right? So we're spread over all these institutions who each have connections with groups of farmers that are already coalesced and already have interest in cover crops. So convening the people is possible. These approaches have been used in the global south thus far, but cover crops provide somewhat of a parallel use case in the global north, in that these crops are not as far along the domestication spectrum, and it's common to find both named varieties and farmer saved seed or variety not stated seed coexisting in this seed system. So in that way, the situations are similar. A lot of elements of the network that are not scaled to this level, but in terms of an initial idea, I think it's an initial idea. And we are piloting the tri-cut technique in our smaller scale trials this season. We'll see how that goes. We'll see what response is, what we need to do to, maximize engagement. And one potential I see is that we're just starting to work with rye, which has a lot more genomic tools available at this point than our legume cover crops. But last point is, however big our data gets and however refined our predictions can be, we know that trust between farmers and researchers is absolutely essential in determining the way any information that comes out of our network and any varieties that come out of our network actually meet the land. So that's what I've got. Thank you for your attention and to all the funders of all these projects I've presented on. And I'll be happy to take questions. Yeah.
How are farmers recruited for these trials?
Yeah. Well, for the CANOVI trials, the benefit of working with these regional groups is that they each have there are 5 Bauta Initiative regional coordinators, and 3 of them work for these regional orgs. So, and they have a lot of longevity in their positions. So they have these trusted relationships. So they were recruited through those networks. We would give season kickoff webinars for folks who were signed up or for folks who were on the fence to communicate directly between like me as the project manager and the farmers, but like the biggest connections came through the regional coordinators. Yeah, so like coordinating with groups that already exist is really essential because like a network that big is really, it's not wise to make it hinge on one person or one coordinator. Yeah. Yeah.
For the cover crop network, I'm assuming most farmers who you're having participated in haven't grown these mixtures before. Are you giving them management recommendations on how to manage that plot?
Yeah. I mean, I'm newer to the cover crop world, so like, but what I'm gathering is some people have grown fall sown cover crops and are used to the growing cycle. A lot of people haven't. So yeah, we'll give sowing recommendations for sure. And I don't know, we'll have to talk about how we structure it in terms of, there will be some regional specificity, so we can like suggest planting dates for your region. But like what we did with CANOVI was, if you learn by conversation that a different planting date is better, please do that. Because like bottom line is we want them to survive, and then like tell us what you did. Yeah, so like enough guidelines so that they get a crop to survive if it's going to, if winter doesn't kill it. But so that our results reflect the kind of on-farm management people could actually do. Yeah.
Very cool talk. Thanks so much.
My pleasure.
Something that surprised me, I guess, was how much you talked about intellectual property.
Yeah.
And I wondered how soon you begin that conversation when you start working with farmers.
Like ideally right away, like before you agree to do it. Again, it really depends on the context. But if you're working especially through an institution like this, like it's really important to make sure that the tech transfer folks are on board with what your ideas are, or you receive from them what your restrictions might be, so that you don't get surprised. Because I think the saddest thing is to make something cool and then have it either not get out into the world or have it get out in a way that ruptures that relationship between you and the farmer. So yeah, as soon as possible, but it's a complex landscape. So yeah.
Related, is it something that you're interested in, or is it just like, oh my God, I have to do this?
No, in fact, those slides are new as of yesterday because I gave a practice presentation to the CCB lab group, and they were like, tell us about IP. And I was like, oh God, okay. So it's inescapable in the seed system as it is now. We can't pretend it doesn't exist. And it's a great place to like have to put into practice whatever values we want to bring to this thing, and to negotiate compromises, because the Wisconsin beets, royalties are going back to the university, and people can have various feelings about that, but we just decided, well, it's funding more grad work, and I was indirectly funded by things like that through the grad school and the Hort department. So
This has been a production of Cornell University, on the web at cornell.edu.